So first, with Zowe version 3, what does it mean and how the versions within Zowe works? So first, Zowe releases major versions every 2 years, more or less, plus minus 6 months. But it's time-based release, so we are not necessarily trying to fit a huge amount of new functionality. It's more like every 2 years we go through things that shouldn't be part of Zowe anymore and introduce new things that we need to break something in order for them to work. What does it mean for you? If you have Zowe V2, it's fine to stay there for another 2 years. The next 2 years, Zowe V2 will be supported, we will be maintaining it, there will just be no future new functionality delivered to it. So, the reasons why you might want to go to the V3 is because there is some new functionality within Zowe V3 that you are interested in getting. This is the primary driver. Or in VS Code for Explorer, it may happen because you accidentally click on something. For Zowe V3, we are changing the delivery. Originally for Zowe V1 and V2, we were delivering every 6 weeks, but based on the feedback we've heard from many different customers, we found out that it's just too often, and so we are moving to deliveries every 3 months, with the possibility of the batch release deliveries whenever needed. Another thing that's relevant to state around version 3 and support is that if you are moving to V3 now, it means that you will have 4.5 years to live on it. 2 years when it will be active and will receive new functionality, and then another 2.5 years in the maintenance stage. And I think this is it. So for what components are part of Zowe V3 that you already knew about mostly, we will be touching them one by one, so we will be touching the functionality that's added. But there are some things that are relevant in general, and that's introduction of the new core component, Zowe Explorer for IntelliJ. It's the similar thing as Explorer for VS Code, but for a different IDE platform. We will touch more on what exactly it means later. And Zowe Installation and Configuration Wizard, it's a technical preview functionality. And while it's not written here, Node.js SDK is now part of the core, and therefore any comprehensive support provider should be able to help you with it. Or at least they claim to do that. We will see what's true. For the main other parts that are being removed from Zowe, there were a few functionalities that weren't used already in V2. We basically deprecated them. It was the Jobs API and Datasets API. The reasons why we are removing them is that these were just Java servers that were passing on requests to the Zowe SMF. And the Zowe SMF functionality, meanwhile, provides more than what these services provided. And we are removing metrics service because it was actually never adopted by anyone. We will have alternative. We know that the general telemetry space is relevant and important, but metrics service wasn't the solution. So these are the things that were removed with the V3. Sure.
Are you going to still be able to like do a 3.4 from Zowe CLI? Because you're taking out the dataset API.
No. It's not. It's the CLI is not touched.
Okay.
For CLI functionalities and Explorer for VS Code and Explorer for IntelliJ, they are already using Zowe SMF. They were not using in V2 already datasets and jobs. Okay. It was deprecated and not started by default, and you really didn't need it. We are talking about it, but we don't actually expect anyone to need to know because it's probably not something you have enabled.
The best part about that question, Brian, is you said, can you still do 3.4? I'm just still trying to process that and come up with a response, but I'm just going to let that one just sit there.
Yeah, by the way, if you have any questions throughout, just raise your hand and we will try to answer them directly instead of waiting for the end. And the first project that we will be talking about, Joe will be talking about, is command line interface.
Thank you. Yeah, so Brian said 3.4. How many people in the room use the command line interface? Great, okay, that's about half. Folks in the room don't know what the command line interface is, or just haven't used it yet? Or okay, so the command line interface, I don't know if we have a picture later in the charts, or no, I'm good. It's fundamentally designed so that you can open your laptop terminal or your Windows command line, and you can basically start typing commands. So you can, one of the cool things you can do is you can say Zowe space files space list data sets and put in the high level qualifier that gets them back. Yeah, the folks in the room over 45, they call that 3.4. Yeah, okay, because there's another way that you can do that, which is to log into an ISPF emulator and type in option 3 and then type in option 4. But for people who don't like to do that, like Brian, they type in 3.4. Anyway, so, and it's really, really popular for sort of newcomers to the mainframe because that's all the help is built in at your fingertips, and it describes the help for you as you go. It's lots of extensions for it, and it's super popular. And then people don't just type it in, they write scripts to do that, and then they put those scripts in other servers doing clever bits of automation and DevOps, and it's absolutely smoking and it's flying off the shelves. What's interesting is the authentication method, multiple API mediation layer gateways. The primary authentication method for the Zowe command line interface is that you have your user ID and your password stored on your client machine, stored in your laptop, and that flowed on every single request. And that's just that's just bad, and there's lots of talks about security, right? That can be attacked. If it's long-lived, it can be phished from you. And even though we do our best to store that securely in the same place that your VPN client certificate will be stored, customers have said that they want something more interesting to do with other authentication methods, and there's a server component you can put between your API server, which is Zowe SMF primarily, that provides a number of those authentication sort of uplifts, and Elliot knows a lot about that and talks a lot about that as well, and it basically supports single sign-on to a number of, so you can sign on outside and have a sort of federated, so that's flying off the shelves right now for enterprise deployment. We support multiple API mediation layer gateways. So you used to have a big file called team configuration file to find all of your endpoints for all of your systems. So you might have lots of different servers running on lots of, on your LPARs, but you could only have one authentication server for that entire scope of that file. Now you can have multiples, and that's a huge improvement. And that's basically the whole vector of getting more enterprise. Any questions on that? But it's a good thing. You keep giving me that. So that's got a button. So if I push the right one.
Yeah, it's straightforward.
Okay, Jenkins template. Does anybody else want to talk to this? Because I have to admit I'm not the smartest person in the room. Jakob, do you want to talk on this one?
So this one is about introducing CLI into the Jenkins pipelines. Originally, the community was providing a template that you could use as a start that would install the Zowe CLI and allow the usage in a simple way. But as far as I remember, in V2 it was still using V1 profiles, and we were basically moving into a specific template that should be easier to use and use the functionality that's new in V2 and V3.
And there's a little URL, github.com, and there's a laser button.
Yeah, that's exactly. You can download it directly, create a fork of the repo, and change whatever you need there, and directly deploy it on your Jenkins.
Cool, thank you. So Jakob just mentioned, are there any folks in the room who used Zowe version 1 for the command interface? Okay, so Andrew did. Okay, a little early adopter there. The way that you defined all of your endpoints was you had a directory in your home directory in your laptop, and it was called something like .zoe/, and then you had a subdirectory called Zowe SMF, a subdirectory called Kix, DB2, Zowe Connect, individual files that held all of the endpoints, and that just didn't scale well. So in version 2, that was all schlommed together into one file. That's not a real word, I don't know why that one came into my head. It was all aggregated into a single file called team configuration. You could actually have multiple ones in Fireball, but it's just better for especially some of the things like, and the version 1 one we had to leave behind in version 2, and every time you tried to access it, it's this has been deprecated, this has been deprecated, and if you try and do it now, it'll say, sorry, we told you for 2 years it's going to be deprecated. Fortunately, the feature to convert from Zowe version 1 profiles to Zowe version 2 is still there. So if anybody does run across that, you still have one button to push, which is basically your last shot to do that conversion. Otherwise, you'd have to go back to version 2 because we always had that conversion feature. But I didn't see anybody complaining too much about that anymore. But we were moving it. This is an interesting one. I talk about one of the things that Zowe command line interface does, and this also affects the VS Code extension for Zowe Explorer, which uses the same method, which is one of the benefits of Zowe, is that you would end up, if you had a profile, the idea with a profile is that you have your persistent user ID and password, you then will connect to the API mediation layer that would basically give you back a token, the same thing that you would give single sign-on to a browser. If you go and look at browser developer tools, you'll see tokens appearing, and that's then stored by Zowe. It can be stored securely in the store credential store, so it can still stop you from being snarfed. We would have scenarios with customers where they had a user ID and a password, and they had the token. And unfortunately, Well, the most sensible thing to do is you say, well, if you've got the token, let's assume that that password might be multi-factor authentication. We don't want to use that anymore. That might be a one-time sort of turn and burn password. So, unfortunately, in version 2, the order was wrong. Within the lifetime of version 2, they tried to reverse it to be the right order. Unfortunately, that broke some upstream plugins, so we had to retract that, but now that's been done with version 3. So if for any reason you did persistently have a user ID and a password and the token, now it'll take the token in order of the user ID and password, which is a good thing. Apart from the vendor that had the defect that they had to fix, which happened to be IBM, but that's fixed. It was an IBM NetView team, I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah. I should probably hit the gas pedal a little bit here. Gas pedal, I'm in England now, I don't have to go a gas pedal, don't I? What do we call it?
Accelerator.
The accelerator, boom, yeah. Okay. Sorry. Removal of deprecated items. We've got a big list here, I'm not going to bore you with them, but there's a boatload of other things that were just deprecated and removed. Cool. Any questions on that? It's all good. It's all good. Excellent.
You even have to step down. This is all yours as well.
Here we are. Okay. About a month ago. Do people know what the Zowe Explorer for Visual Studio Code is? A little bit of show of hands. We got nods, nobody's got hands, less hands, more hands, more hands. You can use it, so you haven't used to see it live. Cool, excellent. The Zowe Explorer for Visual Studio Code is flying off the shelves. We've got lots of talks. In fact, we've got one afterwards about this, so I won't bore you too much about the reasons why it's successful. But you basically have Visual Studio Code, which is phenomenal, open source IDE that Microsoft have created. And it's great, and you've got squillions of plugins for it, and you want to be able to say, I want to connect to my mainframe, I want to be able to work with data sets and jobs and Unix system services and blend all of that wonderful world of plugins with ZOS, and this is your friend. So let's go and see what's new in this. Lots of boring things that I could talk through, but there's fundamentally some just interesting things. I don't think anybody was particularly using this, but the job support for Zowe IDE. So one of the interesting things that Visual Studio Code has got is, because it's written in TypeScript, which is effectively just compiled JavaScript, it gives the potential to run something on an embedded client on your laptop, but it also gives you the ability to serve it in a web page. And this particular technology that the squad was kind of interested in, which is called Zowe, just proved to be not the right bet to make. So they basically pulled support for that across a version boundary, but you're going to see some interesting things coming, probably within this release of Zowe and possibly. So that's something that the squad is, the team are very aware of, is that lots of clever capabilities of the right ones to deploy anywhere. But this wasn't the right horse to bear. Okay. Storing data in local storage. I don't actually know anybody that would be using that, or whether that was just a developer boasting about having done that.
I think it's more changing the infrastructure of where the information are being stored.
Yes.
And before they were just stored in memory, which means that if you turned off your Visual Studio Code, they got lost some of the information, some of the details of where you are, what you have opened. And this move is about moving this into local storage, which means that the data will persist when you are closing the browser, technically speaking, when you are closing your laptop.
Yeah, and I think it also gives the ability as well, if people want to create a pre-canned configuration of Zowe Explorer with a bunch of custom settings that they've got, and then install that, distribute that perhaps through some technology to like 200 desktops or something, more of that information
could be doing. I don't think we've ever done it yet, but it's possible to do it now.
Yeah, and beforehand it wasn't. Yeah, thank you for that. Dataset template for persistent storage settings. Again, this is just really about what the reason behind that. Zowe.ds.template. So again, it's the ability to use shared dataset templates across the team within a workspace setting. So what I just said was kind of bridge these two slides, but it's all in that same space. People want to have that more enterprise, command and control about how they're giving it, and if the desktop, if VS Code was to crash and balk on you for some reason, that information has been persistently stored, and you've got much more ability to do recovery. That's all good. V1 profiles, we've seen that slide already, but version profiles are used by both the command line interface and VS Code. So that's important for both of them, that's what we're going to do. Auto detect is still there. Well, these slides are what I've always talked about. It's almost like I haven't ever looked at them before. Profile creation menu change. So People beat us up about profiles. There's a lot of kind of version 1 profile huggers, you know, and I've met them. And the one thing that they say that they liked was it was simple to create them. The command line interface had something called Zowe profiles create. You just specified a bunch of parameters, hit the enter button, and boom, you didn't have to know about the Gorpy internal YAML structure by which it was persisted. And also within Visual Studio Code, you could right mouse click and say, I want to create a new profile, and a bunch of pop-ups would occur. It wasn't the prettiest user interface, but you could enter the URL and you have true, false drop downs, and you would get to the end. And assuming you hadn't made a mistake, you would then connect. The issue that's all gone, right? Because profiles have gone. So right now, you still only have the way to, there are menus to edit, to hide profiles and mask them, but there isn't yet the editor, and it's a very highly sought after ticket. People do want a sort of GUI-based editor to have that. Okay. Anything more on that side? So if anybody's struggling with it, that will probably come at some point in time. Now we've got some fireworks. This was a really well voted feature. Unfortunately, we don't have a screenshot of this, but we can show you if anybody wants to. But it's within Visual Studio Code, you have data sets, and you can expand data sets, and do cool stuff like edit and rename, and you can migrate data sets. You can do lots of interesting things with Unix system services files as well. Visual Studio Code has a compare function. So what you do right now is you select one data set. Then you right mouse click the dataset member, or it can be a PDSE, and you say select for compare, and then you can go and search for another dataset, including in another LPAR. And you can also do this between a dataset member and a Unix system services file. They don't even have to be the same file system, and then you can say, you find your second one, and you say compare, and then boom, you have that beautiful Visual Studio Code panel that everybody who's ever done Git merges is familiar with, where you have the two lined up side by side, and you have reds and greens, and you can scroll up and down, and you can even blend sub-blending differences in, and that's a really that's a nice feature. Any questions on that? So up until now, we just told you everything we took out, but this is cool. This is very, very cool. I'm really sorry we don't have a screenshot of that because it's super popular. Another interesting thing for folks who use Visual Studio Code is one of the big selling points of VS Code is that you can have connections to multiple ZOS systems across multiple LPARs at once. If you find a particular search criteria that you use a lot, you can right mouse click it and say add to filter. So a bit like opening your browser and having sort of 5 or 6 saved tabs for your favorite websites or something. So you can select your favorite scopes for the data sets and the Unix system services file that you're working from. You don't have to I see users who go search and do a bunch of stuff, then they do search and do a bunch of stuff, and search. If you're always searching the same ones, bookmark them, and that works really, really well together. Issue Unix commands. So this is really interesting because more IDE capabilities are coming in. So you can issue Unix commands from the Zowe Explorer. So you can issue TSO commands from the datasets view right now, which is kind of interesting. And it comes in the terminal from the Unix system services when you can issue Unix commands. You can see where this is going. Right now, it's not context-based, so the next thing that's going to probably come after this, that the squad are discussing, is if you had a file that had a .sh extension or .py for Python or something, that you could actually issue it in context to actually run the right command to execute that file. That's not in version 3, but that's really highly upgraded, and then the squad are working on that if anybody's interested in engaging with them. But you can see where this is sort of going. So the only thing that you can really do in place is submit jobs from a data set, but that's okay, but it'd be nice to have a few more levers, especially from Unix system services. Okay, cool. What do we have here? How are we doing for time?
Somewhat. That's fine.
Yeah. Removal of deprecated items, fairly boring, but this is just up there. It's because if you're really mad about it, we told you. Okay, so any questions on that or not?
And also it's useful as a reference, like you can just grab this as a PDF and all the things that are there if you need for later reference.
Yeah, it is. And also we do have lots of extensions. The Zowe command line interface probably has the most number of extensions, I think about 29, maybe 30 or something. Visual Studio Code had about a dozen or something that were built, and more vendors are building extensions to Visual Studio Code. So they can dongle things off menu options. So if they see a menu option, they go, oh, that's a data set, but I have a really good thing for opening vSAN data sets that we don't do, or that's a DB2 address space, I can do cool stuff. All of those extensions are there. So we always present this set of slides that we presented to the vendors who are building those extensions. And that's a really exciting space. That's one of the reasons why Eclipse did really, really well back in the day, when that was sort of, T-Rex on the sort of Savannah, was because you had that whole marketplace of people doing those extensions, and VS Code has got those. So if you're interested in those, or you're a vendor, or you're a customer who wants to build their own, we've got you covered. Do you want to talk to this one? Go for it.
Yes. The new component that's coming with the version 3 is Zowe Explorer for IntelliJ. Effectively, the functionality of it is very similar to what we already saw in the VS Code. So you are able to connect to different ZOS mainframe systems. You are able to hold your configuration with V3. One more thing that I will confuse you a bit more. The versioning within Zowe is mess. Zowe V3 means collection of projects in the different versions. For example, Zowe CLI, to make it easy, is version 7. Zowe Explorer for IntelliJ, to make it even easier, is version 2. So, yeah, it's the mess. We are gradually adding projects, and they are not always keeping the same versions. Anyway, Zowe Explorer for IntelliJ in version 2, which is the first version that's part of the core, and that is part of the Zowe version 3, is first of all adding the basic functionality now to the core, but you were able to try it and use it in version 1 of the Zowe Explorer for IntelliJ. I will stop calling the versions, it's just confusing. The main change here is that it now works with the team config. Previously it was using its own custom scheme, how to capture this information about the connection. With Zowe V3, it added support for the Zowe team config. So here you can see how it looks like in the real life. For those of you that ever see IntelliJ, it's very familiar. It looks exactly like the other things in IntelliJ. Who is using IntelliJ usually? It's Java developers mainly, because for Java development it's a very, very comfortable IDE for development. On the other hand, it's paid, so your employer must believe that it's valuable work that you are doing and pay the tools for you. It's often easier to get the ones that are unpaid. It provides the same functionality that we saw in the VS Code Explorer, so you can go to the files, we can go to the data sets, you can explore the jobs, and do all the functionality that you would expect from the Explorer for VS Code, just in a different platform. The difference compared to Explorer for VS Code, I think it's still not there, is the interactive TSO session. So in the Explorer for IntelliJ, there is a possibility to open interactive TSO session and run TSO commands directly in the IDE, the same way that you would do with a terminal in the USS or General Linux.
It is in version 3.
It is there?
Yeah, I think it's,
cool.
Andrew, you submitted that. Yeah, so Andrew actually wrote the code for that and submitted it. So I think it might not have made 3.0, but it's in the version that's on the marketplace today. So they must have snuck it in.
Yeah. In general, we are trying to figure out a way and work on making sure that the functionalities in the Explorer for VS Code and Explorer for IntelliJ are more or less in line. So regardless of what you are trying to use, you will get the functionality and you will be able to use something that's comfortable already for you. The installation and configuration of ZOS, this is yours, Jan. Yes, this is
I have a question.
Sure.
How this is working? Is it only for IntelliJ or is it going to go for what was it, WebStorm?
It works for all of them. It's,
Okay.
but we can test and support as a community only for Community Edition, and Community Edition exists only for IntelliJ and I think one more.
Okay.
I think PyStorm is the other one. So technically speaking, it will work on anything else, but as a community we don't have access to tools necessary to test it, so we can't as a community claim that we support it.
Okay.
But it will work.
Okay, so now let me move to the server side from the client's components.
Can you move that way a bit
Okay.
from the camera? Thank you.
Before I jump into the topic, please stand up. Who never installed Zowe server components? Never installed. Never installed. Stand up.
Wow.
Ooh, plenty of people who did.
Cool, great. Thank you. Sit down. So, for the simplification of the migration from version 2 to version 3, we built or create a documentation called migration guide, and it describes everything what is important if you are migrating from any version 2 subversion to the version 3.0 in this case. We definitely tested properly with version 2.18. If you would find something below, like to, I don't know, 11, 10, whatever else, I'm not able to guarantee that everything is there, but definitely we tried our best to record everything what we know about each version to reflect this in this documentation. We also try to improve the installation experience. There are multiple layers, so we took the holistic view of all steps that are needed for the proper installation. We start with the documentation review. We implement some new job samples that are generated, and I will be talking about this slide later. We are now working, and we already did a lot of work in implementation or improvements for the ZWE tool, which is command line interface or command line tool for installation of Zowe server components. And as a benefit, Jakub already mentioned it, we also created as a technological preview the UI wizard that should simplify even more the Zowe server components installations. So what this tool does, basically it's really like a UI application running on your desktop, not in the Zowe desktop or any other desktop, your computer like Mac, Windows, whatever else. You can install it, and when you provide enough information like URL to your FTP or to your mainframe, basically, provide your credentials, then you are guided by a wizard step by step through this screens, and you are able to install theoretically everything from this screen. I have a session about this tomorrow, so who is still here? It's before lunch, so I hope at least some of you will be here. And I will explain more what it can do, what it can do for you, some journey, how you can use it immediately, and so on. Back to what's new in V3. In V3, we included new default YAML files, which are basically intended to be used by us as a Zowe developers and not primarily by you. But if you are brave enough, you can modify the content of the default YAML for each component, and then when we are doing the upgrade or creating a new version, the values that are there will be preserved. So it's improvement from our perspective that should help you when you are doing upgrades to the new version. The config manager is now the only way for reading the values in the YAML file, and it's defaulted, so you are not able to change it. And as it's written here, it's already there as a default enabled from version 2.9, which is like here or something like that. This is something what is still happening. It's not finished yet in version 3.0. We are removing dependency on Node.js in the ZWE utility, but we are getting close to it, so probably the next or the version 3.2 will be definitely free of Node.js dependency. And that's yours.
Yes, API Mediation Layer is first of the server-side component we will talk about. The functionality is mainly to manage and visualize the APIs that are running within your infrastructure, regardless of the ones that are provided by vendors or the ones that you created yourself as an infrastructure APIs to manage your own infrastructure. The first thing that happened, and I will talk a bit about the security in general, what we did is that we strengthened our statement about the security and the dependencies. Previously, we were upgrading the dependencies, watching for the vulnerabilities, but we moved to making sure that all of the primary dependencies that we have are supported, if there is anyone supporting them, and that they are either latest version or -1 version, which sadly brought us to some replacement and some things that we had to do. One of them is we had to replace the Netflix Zowe, as this component is not supported by Netflix anymore, and we needed to move to Spring Cloud Gateway. The change may bring quite fast and in 3.1 some interesting functionality, but right now it's just security currency that needed to happen. But if you see some changes that they were unexpected and unintended, so let us know, we will fix them. Another thing that's linked to this security vulnerability or security objective is move to Spring Boot 3. The world around Java started moving quite fast. It used to be more of a sleepy hollow, happy to stay where it is. But now it's moving quite fast forward, and in order to just keep getting the updates, we need to move with it. That brought us to Spring Boot 3 and prerequing Java 17. So Zowe V3 server-side said they will require Java 17. You don't have to be scared about it though. You can have on your system Java 8 and Java 17, so you can just use Java 17 for Zowe and still use Java 8 for some services that will still run on Java 8. It's also relevant for extenders because we are providing now libraries for Spring that are built on Spring Boot 3. So if you are extending API Mediation Layer with the dynamic applications written in Java, you will also have to move to Spring Boot 3 with your applications if it's built on the Spring at some point. We expect that you will be using Zowe SMF. Well, let's scratch it. We found out that too many customers are using Zowe SMF with LTPA, so even though we are claiming we did a change, we actually didn't. And so we prefer that the customers are using Zowe SMF with JWT enabled and using JWT. But if you don't, it's still possible to use the LTPA token. You just need to configure it. So the only change is that from auto, where we are figuring out what's going on for you, you need to directly say, okay, it's LTPA in case you are still using LTPA as the token. A few minor changes that may be touching you. The API Mediation Layer in V3 introduced a small we already have too many services. But anyway, we introduced a new small service, ZAAS, so the Application Authorization Service. Going forward, this should be the only service that needs to run on platform. The rest can be in a Kubernetes deployment or whatever you prefer. But this one really needs to be there because it provides us with authentication and authorization functionality, mapping of the client certificates, mapping of the external identities like OIDC. So it also brought a new change in the YAML file. There is a new component that needs to be enabled. For now, we support configuration that used to be in Gateway as well as in ZAS. So if you have it in Gateway, you are fine, you can keep it there. But if you want to be like more in line in how it actually works, you can also move it into the ZAS space. You don't have to. I think a framework is yours again.
So we moved to the Angular 18, which basically, if you are just using the Zowe itself as it is, you don't need to take care about this at all. If you have your own applications or components that are using the Angular, then please either check it or whether you upgrade your libraries and your products that are relied on Zowe. Zowe System Services, finally. Basically, we have the default here as a 64-bit. So we don't expect any impact again if you are using the core. If you have some applications that are depend on it, then we have two options, or you have two options. Either rework your application to make it 40 bits, 64-bit compatible, or you need to have another alternative ZSS available on the system, which runs under 31-bit environment. And that's yours or
Yeah,
yours?
this is mine.
Okay.
And the last part is about the extension. Zowe is doing its best to make sure that all of the projects that are part of Zowe are extensible, so that the vendors can provide their own tools built on top of Zowe that allows to use their APIs, their services, and basically anything that's out there. You can find out on the Open Mainframe project or zowe.org/community which extensions are Zowe conformant. This used to be the way you are finding it. Right now all the badges are in one space and you need to click on it. We will also provide the link to a different view where you will see all the V3 conformant extensions.
Yeah, I would say that was better because I was looking for it earlier this week and
Yeah.
I couldn't find it. It was
I will
user experience, so that was much easier to use, I think.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah. So we will fix this. You will get something like this more again. Yeah. What's important to state, first of all, throughout V3 there will be two new badges. There will be new badge for extensions for IntelliJ, so you will be able to extend the IntelliJ the same way you are doing for VS Code. And Zowe Client Software Development Kit, because right now Zowe provides 6 SDKs for Zowe SMF in various stages of maturity. The most mature is Node.js SDK and the Kotlin SDK, as the respective explorers are built on top of them. VS Code is built on Node.js. The export for IntelliJ on Kotlin. Apart from that, we have also in GA state Java SDK. We have in GA state, I'm not sure if it's already GA, but we have Python SDK, we have Swift SDK, and we have one other that I don't even remember. So there are plenty of SDKs that are like in different languages, and we are looking into like a program that would make sure that they behave in the same way, or in a similar way that's native to the languages they are built for, so that it's not really a surprise for you if you are switching between one and the other. And the last thing, if you are moving from V2 to V3, it's in general relevant to validate whether the extension is already conformant that you are using. It won't be a problem for API Mediation Layer, as we are not breaking anything from the extension's point of view right now. So if your extension was working with API Mediation Layer V2, it will work with V3 as well. And I think that's it. We want you to join us, at least somehow, and see somewhat, at least occasionally. Zowe itself is a community. It's not like, yes, we are representing some of the vendors that are involved, but first of all, we are not all of the vendors that are involved. There are many other, I don't know, many other, like 4 or 5 that are involved in a different project. And if you want to meet us, there are a few places where you can find us. So first, on zowe.org/community, you will find our calendar where there are all meetings that you can join. You can also join our Zowe user mailing list, and for the key events, mainly the system demo and quarterly planning that's happening every quarter, you will get invitation with the details on where you can join us, how you can join us. The system demo and quarterly planning is a large meeting where we are sharing everything that's new in the last minor version, and we are sharing our plans as a community for the next minor version. It's also a good place to give us your feedback and say, hey, we really believe that something else should be done, and it's more important than this other thing that you are proposing here and believe as a community. You are just wrong. Apart from that, there are 2 bodies that are responsible for Zowe. It's the technical steering committee, which is actual governance, where we are discussing all the technical metrics and making sure that we are moving in the right direction. But if you want to, there is a Zowe Advisory Council. We are looking for people that want to join either temporarily or permanently. And this is a body that's helping Zowe figure out whether we are on the right path. And I think we have only 3 minutes, so we won't go through these questions. So, do you have any questions now? We've been through what V3 is bringing, what is taking away.
One thing just to add to what Jakob said is one of the things that's very popular. If you just go to github.com/Zowe, search for a repository, look at the issues. What's troubling you? You might really find there's an issue there, and if you are, what's really powerful is you go down to it and you just hit a little thumbs up emoji or a heart emoji or something like that. There's probably another one if you don't like it, but or you can create a new issue and just walk away, and that's so many huge features like the compare and stuff have literally come in because people are doing that. A really highly upvoted feature that I get beaten up all the time about is people have recs and they want to be able to write mouse click and run recs very much the same way they can submit GCL, and that's really, really important. So you don't have to basically sort of give a pound of flesh and commit things and start forking repositories. Just give a little wave or a thumbs down, and it really does influence the product.
Okay, and the last few slides. If you want to learn more about Open Mainframe project, this is the QR code. There are plenty of things. There are new things coming in every half a year approximately. If you want to connect, the Open Mainframe project, just like Zowe, is available on multiple different channels: Slack, Discord, LinkedIn, YouTube. I don't know what other social platforms. We are not on TikTok yet. It's probably gonna change. Yes. Everybody heard about the charities 15 times. I have no idea what they are about. Sorry about it. We are looking for your feedback for this session. If you disliked it, please provide a feedback. If you liked it, you can do it as well, but it's not gonna make us any better.
And I think the code is MP2, right?
Yeah, it's MP2. So if you provide something like a terrible feedback to MP1, they will be very concerned and very confused. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining us here in this session.